Hello, people from the future. This is Casey Peterson. I am an Illinois State Stevenson Center for Community and Economic Development Fellow. I'm in the political science tract. I am originally from a small town near Lake Tahoe, California, kind of in the middle of the forest. I finished my undergrad in 2010, so that makes me old. I'm 31, in San Francisco at San Francisco State University. And I got my bachelor's degree in history, specifically history of the Middle East. When I graduated in the middle of the recession, it was a pretty bad time for getting into teaching, which is what I wanted to do in the Bay Area. So I found myself working in corporate training for Silicon Valley tech firms, which is where I worked for the next 7 years. After that, my wife finished her undergrad, and we decided that, I decided I didn't want to sit in a cubicle anymore, and we wanted to go do something before we got too old and too established in whatever careers we were going to get. And for us, that something was joining the Peace Corps. My uncle had been in the Peace Corps in the 90s and always spoke kind of very highly of it. And we applied actually 3 times to the Peace Corps because married people are a little bit harder to place, especially married people in different sectors. I was an English teacher and my wife was in youth development, which is working with kids, if you don't know what the Peace Corps is. People kind of ask, how was the Peace Corps? What was your experience like? And if you weren't in the Peace Corps, if you did AmeriCorps and you don't know anyone who's done Peace Corps, it's 2.5 years or 2 years and 3 months in country. And the honest answer is it's kind of a little bit of everything. You have the highest highs, the lowest lows, and everything in between. But one thing that I know most people would agree with is you don't come out the same. And that was definitely true for myself and my wife. I was a normal English teacher at a village school, and so I taught from between 3rd and 11th grade English every day. They kind of have a crazy system where, when I taught history here in San Francisco, I would teach 10th grade history, and it was 10th grade history 6 times in a row. But in Ukraine, they don't really have that, so you're jumping around all the time, and it makes for an interesting day, but it makes also for a very hard to plan day. But for the most part, I was glad. If I did 8th grade over and over and over, it would have been a little bit monotonous. My days were many things in teaching in Ukraine. Boring is never one of them. There's always some new word you learn. There's always some new cultural norm that you realize that you screwed up. But I'm sure most of you guys all realize that as well. The hardest aspects for me and my wife were probably cultural aspects. We had a lot of expectations kind of put on us being a married couple, like, why don't you have children? We won't tell the Peace Corps if you do. We also had problems with the weather. Even though we're from a very cold place in California, we're used to cars. So walking around with 10 grocery bags on the ice doesn't make life easy. But as Peace Corps was winding down, my wife told me about all of the scholarships available. And I'd never considered, honestly, going to graduate school before. We both have significant amounts of student debt. And I always told myself the only way I would go to graduate school is if it was paid for. And frankly, I didn't actually believe that was possible. But it turns out it was. And that's where, I looked and I found the Stevenson Center. And I saw that they have a track record of doing this for decades, literally decades. And I decided to apply. I applied to pretty much every graduate program that had a full ride, tuition, plus a guaranteed graduate assistantship across the country, which had history, political science, or education. And taking the GRE in Ukraine was not fun at all. Luckily, the winters are so bad that studying math inside didn't even seem to be a problem at the time. So to my surprise, I actually got into 3 different schools, and that made my decision. I was initially ecstatic, but then I realized, oh my God, I actually have to make a decision here. And so that's when I really started digging down on the programs. And the ultimate reason I decided to come to Illinois State University, knowing nothing about Normal, Illinois, was the program had a built-in network, and I knew that was really important. You have all of these people in your cohort. I think we had 12 in ours, from 5 different disciplines, and you're all throwing it together. You're all from different parts of the country. You're from different disciplines, and you learn a lot from each other. You learn a lot of cross-discipline things, and that's something that I didn't expect. But upon my interview with the Stevenson Center employees, I realized that they really knew what they were doing. And having been through this program for a little more than a year now, I realized how important that is. I think if I would have gone to a different school where I got this graduate assistantship, but I was just a normal graduate student, having to navigate all of a new city, a new school, a new faculty all by myself, it would have made everything much harder. So I remember I was a bit nervous because I had been out of school for literally 10 years. I was like, I don't really know anyone who's gone to graduate school. Like, do you have to wear a suit? That's how dumb I was. I had no idea. If you're also wondering that, the answer is no. I would say the dress is a little better than undergrad, but not by much. So after the first semester, where you kind of realize what the discipline entails, where in political science, you pretty much choose a track, whether you want to go down the theory track or the qualitative data track. Illinois State does a good job of making you learn both, but also they're willing to teach both, which, from what I gather from other schools, is not always the case. Something that I was really interested in is public trust, how people trust each other. That was something that was severely lacking in Ukraine, and I noticed what that did to their society, some of the problems that bring with them, and I wanted to see, where the United States ranks on that list, what we can do to boost those numbers, what other countries have done to try to boost those numbers as well. So one of my first research projects in the second semester was on that and how to build public trust. I remember our first political science class, literally the entire first month, we just stayed in the classroom. And once the professors left, we looked at each other and said, do you have any idea what they're talking about? And apparently this is common. It happens year to year. We're not especially dumber than anybody else. And it was a bit of a wake-up call for us. We did eventually grasp onto the subjects, but that was kind of our welcome to grad school, it's time to go to work moment. I do want to talk a little bit about the community of Bloomington-Normal. Now, we were lucky enough that my wife actually got a job here working for the city of Bloomington before I ever came here. So that's been a really good blessing for us. And it's been really great to network and understand kind of what's going on in the community. It's a fairly progressive community. It's a fairly affluent community because it is the corporate headquarters of State Farm. There is a lot to do, surprisingly. It's got your typical college town feel. It's quite flat, which is hard for me. So there's not a lot of, there's no rivers and lakes and things like that to go to. But it does have, they call it the Constitution Trail, which is a huge network of bike paths that goes straight through the town. And it's really nice because people are out walking all the time. It's also fairly inexpensive to live. I'm constantly astounded at the food prices. Rents are much better, of course, than what I'm used to in California. There's pretty much everything you need as far as shopping and grocery and everything else. And of course, when you have a built-in network of friends from your Stevenson Center year cohort, that really makes everything a lot easier as well. So now I'm in my second year. I'm in my professional practice working on my capstone project. Right now I work at the McLean County, which is the county, Regional Planning Commission. So they're in charge of transportation, housing, analytics for different numbers throughout the county. It's a pretty normal 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job for me. My typical day, I'll have a number of projects I'm working on. Right now, I'm working on an amendment to our long-range transportation plan, which is going to include autonomous and electric vehicles, because that's something I have some experience working with. But it's also set me up really well for understanding the type of jobs that are out there when I graduate in hopefully 6 months. I've got to meet a lot of different people in the community who are in various roles, whether they're governmental or other stakeholder roles. And I think it's been a really valuable experience. I still have 6 months to go, of course, which in that time, hopefully I'll finish up my capstone. I'm also still in the process of finalizing what my capstone will be. If you don't know, I didn't know at this point when I was you. A capstone is what you would do in place of a thesis. A capstone is more of a project where there's some sort of end result rather than just a paper. In my case, this long paper I'm working on to create an amendment to this long-range transportation plan will most likely be my capstone. I'm also planning a project to work with the various municipalities in town, whether that's the town of Normal, the city of Bloomington, or the county of McLean, to create a dashboard to streamline permitting and ADA accessibility rules for companies who would like to put in electric vehicle chargers in one of those respective municipalities. Once I graduate, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to stay here in Bloomington-Normal. California calls me for a bunch of different reasons, but frankly, it's just too darn expensive to move there, even though all my friends are there. I think I'm going to try to look for a job either in the public sector or a quasi-public sector job. We also have an electric truck company named Rivian who is hiring like crazy right now, and they're expanding a lot here in North Normal, so I'll probably look into that as well. To wrap up, I hope you apply for the Stevenson Center if you're interested in one of these programs. If you're not from the Midwest, don't be afraid of the Midwest. I'll admit that I kind of was, but after moving to Ukraine, it's a blessing here, and I'm quite happy to be here. Again, I hope you apply, and I hope that this podcast was useful, and hopefully I'll see you in the next year or two. Thank you.